John chapter 8. We are going to go to one of the most well-known, most frequently quoted, most often referenced verses that I think is in the New Testament. And so it's John chapter 8, verse 31. So Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed in him, if you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine. In verse 32, here's the famous part that people quote. And you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And so the Lord spoke to me a couple different things about this passage and this idea. The first thing that he said to me was, if the type of truth, if the truth that you're receiving doesn't set you free, then you're receiving the wrong type of truth. Now, here's why it's important that you get that. There is a lot, and maybe I'll give you a Bible thought to maybe conceptualize this idea. When Jesus is standing before Pontius Pilate, and basically the decision is being made by Pilate, but based off of the outcry of the crowds, primarily comprised of Jewish leaders and zealots and Pharisees and the like. When the decision's being made, what Jesus' fate is going to be, and again, Jesus laid down his life, so really they had no decision-making power. But superficially, the decision was being made. Pilate and Jesus have this exchange, and Jesus mentions the idea of truth. And Pontius Pilate's response to him is, what is truth? What is truth? And the implication is he's kind of saying, well, truth is in the eye of the beholder kind of thing. Truth is kind of subjective. I don't think that's necessarily the case, maybe in some ways, depending on how you look at it, but I do think that there are different types of truth. And I think that the type of truth that this passage is referring to is a type of truth that brings liberation. It's a type of truth that empowers and enables you into a place with, with God that is significant and powerful and important and ought not to be ignored or missed. And so, I'll give you some silly examples for a second here. If I were to make a video recording of myself brushing my teeth, you getting this visual? And then I were to show that video on the screen, are you waiting for this to happen? It's not going to happen. But if I were to pop that up on the projector screen and we watched a video of me brushing my teeth, there'd be a set of things that you would be able to verifiably state as true concerning my toothbrushing routine. You could probably get a sense of how much toothpaste I'm using. You could probably get a sense of the type of toothpaste I'm using. You could probably is he using an electric toothbrush or a regular? Is he using a circular motion, or is he just going to town and killing his gums? Does he floss? Does he do the full 2 minutes recommended by the Dental Association of America? And the answer to many of these questions is no, by the way. That video, in a silly way, might expose you to a set of facts that are all verifiably true per the video. And I would argue that none of those facts would actually bring you one lick of freedom or liberty. They wouldn't benefit you, they wouldn't empower you, they wouldn't propel you into a greater purpose or measure of what God wants to do in your life. They wouldn't allow you to overcome or conquer some obstacle or restriction or obstruction. They would just be a bunch of nonsense facts that don't produce a ton of value. So that's maybe one issue with maybe blanket statement and truth. Here's another way to slice this. When Adam and Eve are in the garden, and they're told, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, otherwise you're going to die in that day. So in Genesis chapter 3, when Eve eats of that tree, it actually says that her eyes are opened. Right? The eyes of both of them were opened. And what's the first thing with their now opened eyes, because they've eaten of this tree? The first thing that they perceive that they had not perceived before is that they're naked. Is it true? Was it true that they were naked? Yeah, they were naked. Did the reception of this truth, did the idea that they now possessed this truth as their own, did it set them free? No. Actually, and this is maybe the more valuable place to really hover around for a second and try to understand. There's actually, I'll say, a wrong type of truth that may be factually verifiable in some ways, but actually doesn't bring liberty, but instead could do the opposite. It could bring bondage. And that's exactly what's happened in this case. If you keep reading in Genesis, they sew fig leaves together, make themselves some coverings, and then click a few verses later for me, if you would. When God asked Adam, "Where are you and what are you doing?" I heard the sound of you in the garden and I was afraid. I was afraid. I was afraid because I was naked. God's response, who told you that you were naked? God didn't say, it's not true, you're not naked. He said, the way that you came into this truth and then what you did with that truth was actually the opposite outcome that I wanted to have for you, that I had intended for you. And so this wasn't just about facts, true or false. This was about the means and even the type and flavor of the truth itself. And God is interested in the type of truth that brings liberation and freedom. God is interested in the type of freedom or type of truth that doesn't bring you into fear or shame or condemnation or guilt, but to the contrary, he's interested in the type of freedom or the type of truth that leads you into a freedom that allows you to then be empowered to live out his purpose and plan, which maybe that sounds so empty if you're like, well, I don't know if I want his purpose. No, but he gives you the desires of your heart. He fulfills and satisfies the deepest part of who you are, and he knows your frame, your makeup, and your ingredients better than you know yourself. The hairs on your head are numbered. This is the God who made all of the stars. Scientists can't count them all. They can't even see them all. There's so many. There's like, some estimates say there's maybe like 1 septillion stars. I don't remember how many zeros that is. It's like 23 zeros or something after the number 1. And they can't. This is the God that categorizes, catalogs, and keeps track of every single star. And that's just like not his focus even. You're his focus. You're the apple of his eye. You're the object of his affection. You're made in his likeness and his image. You're his children, his offspring, his spiritual genetics passed down. And now, most importantly, he is love and he is your Father. And so anyways, Father wants you and I to expose into a truth that liberates us, yes, into his purpose, but not in a religious servitude kind of empty, hollow way, but in a way that this is where your zone is going to be. This is where you're going to find fulfillment. You're going to find peace and joy beyond measure. You know, the Bible talks about a peace that transcends human understanding. This is where that peace lives. The Bible talks about joy unspeakable and fullness of joy. This is where that joy lives. This is a type of truth that propels you into that place of peace and joy, rather than a place of fear, condemnation, guilt, shame, and death. So let me try to bring this into your life. Turn on the news. Some of what they say will be true, right? We could debate how much of it is true. Some of it will be factually true. Very little of it will be liberating truth, though. very little of it will be empowering truth. Very little of it will be the type of truth that I think Jesus is referring to in John chapter 8. John chapter 8. So let me, I guess, give you some examples from my own life. When I first came to Christ, I would binge drink because I was a college student. I would smoke marijuana because I was a college student. I would chase after girls because I was a college student. I would say a bunch of vulgar words and things and F-bombs and the like because I was a college student. Not that college students all do that, by the way, but these are the college students I hung out with, and I was one of them. And when I started going to church in that place, I remember going to churches and hearing the lofty standard that the Bible seemed to have espoused concerning morality, character issues, and the like. And I remember hearing things like the conduct and the standard of living that, Christ would want to call his disciples to. And I remember being completely and utterly overwhelmed. Not in a way that liberated me into a place where I could overcome any of that, but in a place where I was in the ditch, I nosedived into the ditch and felt like it was impossible for me to achieve any of it, so why even try? Why even bother? And mostly by accident, which is actually one of the best ways to get a breakthrough, by the way. When you kind of take your hand off the wheel for a second and stop trying so hard, but you'd still give God some space, that's where your breakthrough tends to come. And it's not because God is like, yeah, I only do things by accident. And people, no, it's actually because you were in the way and you didn't realize it. So sometimes, I don't know if those of you who have little children, sometimes you just need to get them to let go of what they're trying to do for 1 second so that you can pick them up and help them achieve the goal that they're looking to achieve. But in order for that, you have to get them to let go for a second. That's how it is a lot of times with us and God. We don't realize we're holding on to what we think is how we're going to achieve something, and then we're actually obstructing his grace from just flowing freely, and his his love from just having a place to build us up into where he's taking us. So anyways, after a while of hearing, what the standard of Christian conduct was and realizing the huge deficit that I had compared to where I was in that place, I kind of gave up for the most part. And by accident, over time, I found myself no longer dropping F-bombs in casual conversation. I found myself by accident, I guess I don't really have a desire to go to that frat party. They're loud and they're gross, and I'm an introvert, so what am I doing there anyways? This is kind of dumb. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't even like beer. So it was it was this whole what was I thinking? Even just logic, forget about Jesus for a second. What was I trying to achieve in this moment? And it was just, this is where I was in life though. And so just by accident, being exposed to the presence and the goodness and the love of God on whatever measure I was able to receive it, stuff started to kind of break off layer by layer. And then I started to hear, I'll say, more profound truth. More profound truth. And I'm not saying it's not true that there's a standard of conduct that a Christian ought to aim towards, but I'm saying that was a superficial truth that I don't think, this wasn't what Jesus was trying to start me off with. It was almost like, I was like, hey, let me crack open my calculus book, even though I've never done algebra before. And let me figure this out. No, God wanted to raise me up on it through a journey and a progression relationally, and he would have graciously God is a forbearer of problems. He's not looking to pummel you with them until you're buried into the ditch like I was. That was all me. That wasn't the Holy Spirit. That was the inner idiot. That was within me. It was whatever, my religious conscience, my religious efforts, my self-measurement of what was, right and appropriate. So anyways, then I started hearing more profound truth than just here's what the character of a Christian ought to look like. I started hearing things like, you're righteous not by what you do, but by Him. And if you believe in Him, you automatically have His righteousness, and there's nothing more you ever need to do to achieve righteousness ever again. In fact, your behavior isn't what dictates or defines your righteousness, good, bad, or ugly. It's really your faith in Him, period. And there aren't different degrees of righteousness, there's just righteousness in Him. Because it's all His righteousness and it's all the full degree of righteousness. Doesn't mean that every behavior is righteous, but it does mean that as far as my position and purpose and who I was, I am and I was the righteousness of God in Christ, because He became sin. He who had no sin became sin so that I would become the righteousness of God in Christ. And I said that personalized to me, but you could be saying the same exact thing. And that's 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21, if you wanted to look it up. I need a drink. So hearing that more profound truth, it helped in one sense because it corrected some wrong thinking and some wrong attitudes. But I noticed that hearing the truth itself didn't actually bring me freedom. This is important. Hearing the truth itself didn't actually bring me freedom. Believing that truth didn't even fully bring me freedom. It helped a little bit more. I'm going somewhere with this if you're like, what do you mean believing didn't help you? I'm not saying it didn't help at all. I'm just saying it didn't get me all the way there. Most of you believe this, by the way. I believe this. And guess what I'm doing right now? Guess what you're probably doing right now? I'm on a journey, a progressive journey of continual increase of liberation and freedom. My beliefs trail. So it's almost like, yes, my beliefs help pioneer and pave the path, but I still need to walk down the path. And so there's a journey that occurs even beyond belief. Okay, so what ultimately ends up helping me? Go back to John chapter 8. Let's read 31 again. We read this and we kind of skipped right over it. Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed in Him, wait a minute, they already believed in Him. So what is He trying to get these people that already believe in Him to do? If you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples. This is almost exactly like what I was just talking about. Believing is, yes, step one and an important step and a valuable step, but it's not the whole thing. You need to continue in His word, and then you'll truly be His disciples, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. So let me tell you another story. I read this verse 1,000 times. That's an exaggeration, by the way. I read this verse a bunch of times, and this is how I read it. If I continue reading the Bible, if I continue reading the Holy Scriptures, if I continue reading the New Testament, reading whatever, or reading the Gospels, which has the words and teachings of Jesus, if I continue reading and studying what Jesus said, then I'll be His disciple, then I'll be free. That's closer. Still not how I see it today, and not in the revelation that I'm about to give you, I think will help more than what I just described. And I'm not against that path. I'm not as part of the equation, but I don't think that's the whole equation. Let me give you some Greek here. If you continue in my logos, this is John, who started off his book, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was God, and the Logos was with God. The Logos made its dwelling place in flesh, and that Logos ultimately is Jesus Christ. So if you continue in my Logos, now the word continue is another interesting word. If you were to, and I did this earlier today actually, if you were to go into eSword or another lexicon or Bible study tool, and you were to look up where that word for continue is used throughout the New Testament, you would quickly realize that it's very, very rarely, hardly at all, ever translated as continue. It's almost always translated as abide in or remain in. Let me say it again. If you abide in my logos, then you're really my disciples, and you'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Jesus goes on to say at the end of this whole exchange, where is it? Is it on the screen or the next one? Yeah, he restates his point, but he says it differently in verse 36. If the Son makes you free, then you are free indeed. You will be free indeed. If you abide in my logos, by the way, I am the logos of God. If you abide in my person, myself, my essence of who I am, if you abide in me, I am the Logos. This is what he's saying to them. If you abide in me, and you intentionally bask in that and soak and saturate that place, in that place, you saturate and soak yourself up in there, that's where you know the truth, and the truth will make you free. By the way, were Adam and Eve naked? Yes. Did God have a plan, do you think, to keep them from knowing they were naked for the rest of their lives no matter what? Was God's plan like, yeah, I'm never going to tell any human ever that they're naked, and me and the angels are like playing this like ultimate practical joke. Like we basically trick these people into thinking they're not naked, but they are. No, I think that God was like, look, there's 2 trees in the garden. You took a shortcut here, you cut ahead, and you tapped into something outside of the path that I had for you. And yes, you happened upon something that was factually true, but instead of bringing you liberation, it brought you bondage and slavery. And so I think if they stayed in the garden and walked with God and started partaking of the tree of life, I think that over time, they would come into a fullness of awareness of truth and be increase of liberty as they went. And I think that was the intention the entire time. And in fact, if we go back earlier in John chapter 8, is it verse 12 or 15 that I put in there? 12. So that just context-wise, this is Jesus' opening remark to this whole section. So if you really want to place this, he makes this statement right after the woman who was caught in adultery and they wanted to stone her to death according to the law. That whole exchange, this is immediately following that. And then eventually we get to verse 31 through 6, what we just read out loud. But the rest of it is just an argument between Jesus and the Pharisees about truth and how do you bear multiple testimonies to bear truth, witness to truth according to the Old Testament kind of argument. So anyways, this is Jesus' opening statement in this whole section. Jesus again spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, if you've been paying attention for the last few weeks, this means something to you, hopefully. In John 1, it says, in the beginning was the Logos was with God, the Logos was God, and it says, in him was life, and that life is the light of mankind. And we defined life as John 17:3, this is eternal life, that they would know you, the one true God, and Jesus Christ, the one whom you sent. So life is knowing God. The tree of life is a tree that bears the fruit of your relationship of knowing him. And so this whole thing, this whole discussion about truth that brings liberty, it comes down to accessing and receiving truth in your relationship with him. It's the difference between flicking on the news and filling your soul with things that might be factually true, but they bring you down in the ditch and the bowels of human thinking. And I'm not saying don't watch the news, by the way. I'm just saying watch the news through a certain lens. Don't watch it as, well, this is my source of truth that I receive. Like, watch the news because, yes, they might be broadcasting information that is factually true, but it's not there to bring you liberation. It's not there to deepen and empower your relationship with the Lord. It's there to sell. It's there to generate profits for companies and such. So where am I going with all of this? I don't know. I spent the first part of my Christianity overwhelmed, feeling I could never live up to the challenge of the conduct standard that Christ espoused. It was impossible. So I felt downtrodden and incapable. Then I started to accidentally fall backwards into some liberty, and I got less hung up on, I'll say, kind of superficial character issues, and instead I fell into the zone of, okay, this is real, he's real, my life is now beginning to show evidence of the reality of who he is, and I don't fully understand how or what's going on, but it's happening. So then I started going on this war path. I am going to be an awesome child of God. I'm going to read my Bible a ton. I'm going to pray 2 metric tons every day. I'm going to hear God's voice. I'm going to do this. I'm going to start this prayer meeting, this Bible study. I'm going to disciple these people. I'm going to go door to door and get people saved and evangelize. I'm going to do this and that and the other thing. And then maybe someday I'll pastor a church. Man, what a tiresome hamster wheel to run on. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying God didn't use some of it, and I'm not saying there wasn't good fruit from some of it, but in my heart, I was still trying to achieve something. I was trying to earn his pleasure, his approval. I was trying to be the best Christian you could be, because why not? If this is real, what better thing to put your hand to put your time to put your energy into? Somewhere along that hamster wheel journey, I fell into, again, mostly by accident, I fell into a revelation of God's grace and goodness and love. And now, I do a bunch of those things still. I pastor a church. I work hard to try to do a good job at pastoring the church. So I'm not trying to diminish the effort or the energy put forth toward a goal for God. But none of it anymore has anything to do with me trying to earn something in his sight. I'm not trying to get more anointed. I'm not trying to get more spiritual. I'm not even trying to get more faith. I have the faith I have, and if my faith continues to grow as I walk with him, that's awesome. But my goal is not more faith. My goal is more fellowship with him. That's the only goal. And if living in that space, what it does is it frees you, yes, from, I'll say, superficial sinfulness, but it also frees you from that more subtle challenge of religious, ritualistic, legalistic pursuits. And if you can be free both from sin and from religion, the only thing that ends up being left is intimacy with him. I care more about hearing his voice than I do about how many people I got saved in a year or a week or a month. I care and more importantly than just hearing his voice, I care more about responding to what his voice is saying than I care about how many pages of the Bible I read this week. I care more about whether or not when I'm ministering, and it could be in a forum like this or it could be a one-on-one conversation, but when I'm doing something that I think God's called or asked me to do, I care more about my responsiveness to what he's saying than I care about whether or not I said too many ums out loud with a microphone in front of me. Don't get me wrong, I prefer not to say a whole lot. I'd prefer not to do weird things that are distracting to you or to me. But at the end of the day, if there was a pie chart of what matters, Paul said it this way: I didn't come to you with eloquence of speech or as a trained orator or with trained rhetoric. I came to you in the Spirit with power. Like he cared more about, like, am I saying and doing what the Spirit is saying and doing to me? Am I responding out of what the Spirit is saying and doing? That matters more than whether or not this is a super polished Toastmasters Club speech. What I'm hoping this discussion, this teaching has produced, so I'll try to round it out I'll cap it out with this. I'm hoping that somewhere in here you've peeled off a couple layers of truth. Truth in and of itself isn't what liberates you. It's Him, the Son, the Logos. That's what liberates you. And by the way, He is truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. When Pontius Pilate and him were having that exchange, you know what Jesus said that prompted Pontius to say, "What is truth?" For this reason, I came into the world. For this reason, I was born. Strong statement from Jesus. So that I can bear testimony to the truth. He came to bring truth. In John 1, when they enter the prologue to John, it says what he came full of grace and truth. Did you know that grace has a companion? Grace has a partner in crime. Grace by itself is actually a very difficult thing to take hold of. You need an anchor to partake in grace. And grace, by the way, is God's free-flowing favor, His loving kindness and goodness just freely accessible to you without having to pay some wage or earn it through some performance. But grace, if you read the Bible, carefully and kind of see how it plays out, grace has a companion, and it's truth. It's truth. And so when you start, and you don't have to do it accidentally, by the way. Maybe I should round that out too. I kind of said it. Most of my Christian life, I did this accidentally. I accidentally got free from cursing a lot. I accidentally got free from drinking too much. I accidentally got free from smoking. I accidentally stopped being so religious and self-effort motivated. I accidentally, but man, now I start doing these things on purpose. Now that I'm no longer in by accident mode, now I purposely fellowship with Him around what He's saying to me every day. Now when I don't feel like I'm doing much or that I'm capable of much, now I start talking to God about how much He loves me and approves me already for free. And I start thinking about how when Jesus was baptized in the Jordan, before He ever healed anyone, taught anyone, did anything publicly for God, before He served God in any overt public way, the Father's voice bellowed from heaven and said, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I'm well pleased." What does that tell you about His love and His being pleased with you? It has nothing to do with what you accomplish for Him. It has to do with who you are. You were born into it. Man, Maven, Grayson, Eden, my kids, don't get me wrong. It's cool when they do the right things and do things that I'd prefer them to do. It's great. But that doesn't make me love them more. And when they do the wrong thing, it doesn't make me love them less. Intuitively, you know that would be really wrong parenting, right? But then if you start to think about your relationship with God, how do we conceptualize? Well, I got to get this right so that God, I want Him to say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Now I'll put you in charge of 10 cities," or whatever the power. Like, I don't know what we're aiming at. Like, we take these parables and we try to run to the bank with them. I think He was just trying to illustrate a point, and He wasn't trying to put you on a hamster wheel that goes nowhere. So anyways, all that to say, there's a place in Him. It's not religious, and it's not sin conscious. It's just a place of being in His presence and allowing His voice to speak to you. That's where truth comes from, and that's where liberty, the type of truth that brings liberty, comes from.